This is Jusant. It's a small indie climbing game from French studio Don't Nod. And for a while now, I've been trying to think of a decent way to introduce it to you, but to be quite honest, it's hard for me to describe how effective this game truly is at pulling you into its world and prodding your imagination. So instead, I think it's best that I just show you. That's a small scene from about midway through the game. It's one of many, and I think it best illustrates why I think that Jusant is a masterclass in environmental and visual storytelling. Every little detail of that scene, every shot, the small details in the environment and the audio which takes center stage and unifies it all tells its own little story that prods your imagination and invites you to ponder at what life was like when this little street was bustling and full of life. Though what you won't spot from that scene is just how seamlessly this is all woven into the rest of the overarching narrative and unintrusive gameplay loop that all fits together to make this game what it is. At its core, Jusant is a story about change and about reflection. Our main protagonist, the flute player, and his cute little floating blue companion are scaling the height of an enormous cliff to restore life after the Jusant, the falling of the tide, an event that saw all of the water slowly disappear and life on the cliffside begin to disappear alongside it. The environments not only tell their own stories, but they act as crucial points in the dot trail that you are following throughout the game. Its many towns and settlements reveal their own histories, but also the ways in which they evolved and the connections between them. It's quite common for games to do one or the other, but it's rare for them to provide environmental storytelling that is able to convey stories and emotions in isolation and also provide meaningful insights into a wider mystery. It's even rarer still for both of those things to be as high quality as they are in Jusant. It could be water running through a cave town side street, painting a picture of life and energy, a small abandoned cafe once brimming with locals and travelers, or the small fishing sites and dilapidated boats remaining present despite rising ever higher, showing the stages of life and society as water is slowly lowered throughout the years. It's all backed up by the amazing, and I mean truly amazing, score. Just listen to some of this stuff. The music and the atmosphere, they both paint a bleak picture of the world we are inhabiting, but never an apocalyptic one despite its themes. Various journals and messages of previous inhabitants scattered throughout the game always read to me as simply people looking to get by and stay in touch with each other despite hard times. There was never too much drama or intrigue, it was simply people trying to survive and adapt. It really drew me into this world because I think it more closely matches how in the real world we deal with this crisis of our own. Oftentimes there just isn't enough mental room to be overly dramatic or tense. And even if lives are on the line, we tend to express our feelings, especially our written ones, with a reserved calm, like the act of journaling is helping us process the world around us. Jusant's people deal with their crisis in a very similar way to how we deal with the current climate crisis we face, one day at a time, attempting to make the best of bleakness. There is anger and there is loss of hope, but it's slow and it often comes along with a forced acceptance or a shift in priorities. Nothing illustrates this better, I think, than the journal following Bianca's climb. Bianca is the game's main named character who leaves bits and pieces of a journal scattered throughout the cliffsides. Her journey is similar to that of the players. She makes her way up the cliffside on her own journey, motivated by both necessity but also a desire to explore, much like we the player are. I don't really want to speak too much on this, as I feel touching on this character's development throughout the game would be spoiling what I think is the best part of the writing and narrative of this game. What I can say is that it greatly touches on what I mentioned earlier, the way that the writing is less interested in melodrama, and instead focuses on the human way that we deal with inevitabilities and face struggles of our own. As you begin to rise higher and higher, the landscape shifts into one that emanates more and more life. What starts out as a dry, desolate desert transforms as you begin to get closer and closer to the only remaining source of water, the clouds. I think proximity to water is one thing, but what this also demonstrates to me is age. Lower areas are more recently abandoned, the impacts of a populated presence are more recently felt. Higher up, the civilization is long gone as water levels have forced people away a long time ago. And you can tell this quite clearly with how much more vibrant and populated with life these areas are. Traversing these cliff sides upwards to find more of civilization is what forms your primary gameplay loop in Jusant. It's a climbing game, and it's here I think where the game has neat ideas, but it's never intent on exploring them with the same depth that it explores its themes. I think there was definitely avenues that the gameplay could have taken. There are a few neat ideas that shake up the climbing and swinging routine. Heat from the sun will burn away certain paths after a time and reduce your stamina, forcing you to think more carefully about your approach. And strong wind can heavily affect mobility and must either be avoided or taken advantage of in certain circumstances. Those are a few examples, but they don't really come around too often, and there was never a point where the traversal puzzles had me scratching my head at all. There wasn't much of a mechanical challenge either. As much as the climbing system is immersive, it's also fairly easy, and stamina is plentiful, so most players won't experience much in the way of trouble. Probably the more unique decision, and something that is very different for me as somebody who enjoys a lot of action games, is Jusant never really has an actual fail state. You'll learn quite quickly that you can't actually fall off the cliff, which removes a lot of the potential risk and tension. Really, this climbing is the weakest aspect of the game. To me, if you are looking for a challenge or at least some engaging, tense moment-to-moment gameplay, you're better off looking elsewhere. But it is a focused and deliberate product, and I can commend it for that. I like when a game focuses on a single strong element and builds around that without letting scope and over-designing systems get in the way. This game had a story to tell and a tone it wanted to set, and it's very clear that adding some form of death mechanic really wouldn't have helped that. This stands out to me so much because death, or some kind of true failure state, is one of those things that feels almost universal in game design. It's pretty rare that a game has such a sure vision that it's willing to look at everything through the lens of achieving that vision, to the point where it begins to question the necessity for seemingly ubiquitous mechanics that games looking to appeal to mass markets wouldn't even think twice about adding. Really, the only blatant negative that I could point to was the game's traversal that wasn't climbing. Oftentimes when walking around, or in particular areas when trying to navigate downwards, I found that my character would often get stuck on terrain or just flat out refuse to move when running into a slight bump. These are a few times where the indie really showed, but it was never distracting enough to completely pull me out of the experience, and my character was never so stuck that I had to reload a checkpoint or anything, so that's a fairly minor complaint. It works seamlessly most of the time, and even when it doesn't, it's never enough to pull you out of that experience that the world design and sound design really pull you into in the first place. Really, the best way that I can describe playing through Jusant is that it felt almost like playing through an old fairy tale or an ancient tribal story passed down through the ages. It's something that is, at a surface level, quite simple and digestible, but exists more as a reflection of a wider culture, or to put more complex issues and understandings into words and visuals. The game itself even hints to this idea with the references to the flute player, this mysterious, almost spirit-like being that doesn't seem to have an origin, traveling from place to place, restoring the waters of the world. To me, the main story was the fairy tale, the action that could be written onto walls or passed down to children, but the environmental storytelling was the truth beneath that tale that illustrated the wider culture and richer history that underpins any good tale that has stood the test of time. It isn't a blockbuster, and to some, I think its lack of depth, pun intended, may not be enough to keep you engaged at a gameplay level. But if you are looking for a short experience that hits the same notes as going to a museum for a day or watching an artsy movie, then Jusant is worth taking a look at, a listen to, and the time to really appreciate.